Hello guys, this will be a custom Endymion cards video full of custom card support and retrains. I have retrains for some of the good old spell counter cards like Arcanite Magician, Crusader, Black Alchemist, and Defender, as well as some bad ones like Rogue, Quick Booster, Magicat, and Magidog. Now off to Assassin of Endymion, 1500 attack and 200 defense, level 3 fire, scale of 8. I assume if you're watching this you know the themed effects of the Endymion archetype. Assassin's Pendulum effect allows you to special summon her from the zone and activate or equip one spell trap that you can place a spell counter on from your deck, and if you do, place a spell counter on each. This is obviously meant for you to search cards like Magical Citadel or Institution, though it has a surprisingly large amount of other targets, being Power of the Guardians, Arcane Barrier, Gateway of Chaos, Extra Buck, Tower of Babel, Spellbook Starhall, Pictureback Power Stone, Mythical Beastmorph, and Endymion's Lab. Her monster effect is similar to Magister's, except that it's from the extra deck instead of from the deck. And instead of gaining a spell counter on attack, she gains 2 during your end phase. We don't know Rogue's lore or gender, I assume female. We are unsure if it's a friend of Endymion, and they're like an assassin for him or a spy master, or if they're a rogue, as in like they just left the Citadel. The original is terrible, but it did seem spell-based, so I stuck with that in this retrain. I assume Rogue is supposed to be some sort of spy master, because the original can search Institution and Endymion's lab, which feels very they are everywhere they need to be sort of thing. So in my headcanon, she is a secret enforcer, ensuring there aren't anyone abusing or misusing the power of magic. If there are, she is to gather information she can about them and report to Endymion or anyone of higher hierarchy like Cerberus about the individual. I also like to think she is able to teleport or at least summon portals to and from Mythical Institution and the Endymion's lab, and possibly other parts of the Citadel as well. Alright, so here is a community creation. So this card was made by a fellow member of the custom card community. Credit goes to Sahaykan. It has the same theme as the Endymion archetype. Its name is Synchronizer of Endymion. It's level 3, fire, spellcaster pendulum tuner. Attack is 1000, defense is 200, its scale is 2. And I forgot to mention this before, but Assassin's scale is 8. Now, this one's pendulum effect is you can summon both this card from your pendulum zone and one non-tuner monster that you can place a spell counter on from your hand or graveyard, and then if you do, place one spell counter on each. Its monster effect is it cannot be used as link material except for a monster that can place a spell counter on. Once per turn, you can remove up to 2 spell counters from anywhere on the field. Be pretty funny in a mirror match. Increase or decrease this card's level by the same amount. If this card is used as synchro material, the other materials must be monsters you can place a spell counter on. And then obviously it has the same float effect as Magister and Servant. The pendulum effect summoning from the hand or graveyard is actually pretty good. I wish the scale was high, but a high scale tuner is a lot to ask for. The link restriction is because of Hockey Fibrax. It first said cannot be used as link material at all, but the guy who made it said he don't play Endymions. He just sort of knew how they played, so I took the liberty of alleviating that restriction so that you can at least summon things like Selene or Daybreaker. The level modulation is fantastic. The level modulation is also permanent, which doesn't really matter, but I feel like that small detail could come in handy. Synchro material restriction is fine, and has the same float as Magister and Servant. I originally felt bad it didn't have a way to gain spell counters by itself, like naturally, but then I realized it doesn't restrict you to synchro summoning spellcasters or spell counter monsters, and it's not like it's ever staying on the field when you summon it since it is a tuner. There is no lore on this one. It was a card they made for fun, so they didn't even know about my Arcanites or my own tuners, but I thought it was cool for me to include it in this video. With that being said, it doesn't mean I did not make one up. There's a card I know some of you know because you looked up spell counter tuners, and that is Frequency Magician. Frequency Magician wants to join the club too, the Endymion Club, and wanted to learn the magics Zoro once used. Zoro is the tuner in Magistus that was friends with Endymion but was seemingly never seen again. Magistus showcased young versions of Vare from Witchcrafters, Alistair from Invoked, and Endymion himself, but older Zoro is nowhere to be seen. The story is under the assumption this story is under the assumption he somehow perished, seemingly from his own experiments. Endymion declined Frequency's request, but Celine, Endymion's wife, intervened. She said it was about time Frequency joins the club, and if they are going to attack the Spellbook Tower once more, they should start allowing those to join the club under intense testing. Endymion, thinking it over, decided to give him a shot. Endymion personally taught him to see if he was capable and responsible with his own eyes. Frequency picked up Zaro's fiery magic and seemed to be able to use it properly. Endymion sent him to the Mythical Institution to be tested by Master Cerberus. He passed with flying colors. Celine came to check up on his progress and asked Cerberus if he thought the magician was ready. Cerberus said he did great and that even Arcanite Magician, who visited the institution momentarily, said the magician gave a glowing performance. Cerberus sent Assassin to deliver a message that he approves the magician, giving Endymion the final green light to add him to the Endymion ranks. Moving on to Arcanites, I have a third archetype under the umbrella of spell counters. And while I'm not a fan of Konami splitting archetypes that have no business being separate, like Parchef and Agents, they seem to split archetypes that are same but different in playstyles, such as Endymion and Mythical Beast, so I'm rolling with Konami's logic to be a little more realistic. Thankfully, all Arcanites are extra deck monsters, so it doesn't hurt too much. Each Arcanite has the same following effects. Each time a spell counter is activated, place one spell counter on this card. When that spell resolves, you can remove 6 spell counters from your field or destroy this card, and all of them special summon themselves. If you remove 6 but have different effects, if you destroy them, that's their pendulum effect. Then in their monster effect, they all share these effects. They must first be summoned properly or special summoned face down from the extra deck by attributing 2 monsters you control with a spell counter. This is treated as a Xyz, Fusion, and Synchro summon respectively. You can only special summon each by the effects of monsters or pendulum effects once per turn. When they are destroyed in the monster zone, you can place them in the pendulum zones and place spell counters on them equal to the number they had as a monster. They all have these effects, so I would not be mentioning these, and I would not be showing them on screen to save screen space. Arcanite Guardian of the Citadel, level 7 Earth Spellcaster, 2000 attack, 3100 defense. In his pendulum effect, when a card you control that you can place a spell counter on would be destroyed, you can bounce them instead. And if you do, add spell counters on those cards to a face-up Magical Citadel of Endymion you control. He requires 1 tuner and 1 non-tuner spellcaster. For his monster effect, when summoned, place 1 spell counter on him. Quick effect, you can remove 3 counters from your field, target 1 spellcaster or card you control that can hold spell counters, and if you do, it is immune to spells or traps for the turn. Your choice. You can only use this effect of Arcanite Guardian of the Citadel twice per turn. Twice per turn, when a spellcast stirs you control will be destroyed. Select any of them, remove 1 spell counter from your field for each instead. You can only select spellcasters you cannot place a spell counter on once per turn this way. This makes it so it's better than his original, where if you activated its effect, it would protect all spellcasters on the field. It effectively is a once per turn protection for your generic spellcasters, like the original, but is a little stronger and can be used twice for the archetype that is designed for. Its scale is an 8 as well. It's not really splashable, so I don't really see that as an issue. Arcanite General of Endymion, level 7 Earth, 2700 attack, 18 defense, has the same materials as Arcanite Guardian. I'm going to talk about his monster effect since you need that to understand his pendulum effect. For his monster effect, when summoned, place 1 spell counter and 1 Arcanite counter on this card. Once per turn, place 1 Arcanite counter and 1 spell counter on a card you control. Cards you control with an Arcanite counter can use their effects as quick effects if it's a spell, or gains 500 attack and defense if it's a monster. Pendulum effect allows him to place an Arcanite counter on a card you control, which you can place a spell counter on. Scale of 8 because it's not really splashable at all really. Do note he can target things like Assassin, Reflection, Servant, Magister, or the other Arcanites in the zones, making their pendulum effects quick effects. But since it has to be a card that can hold spell counters, you cannot do this to Endymion or Mythical Beast. Arcanite Black Alchemist. It's an Xyz monster, rank 7, wind spellcaster. 2200 attack, 2800 defense. Its pendulum effect is it can shuffle one spell card that lists spell counter in its card text, or one quick play spell card from your graveyard into your deck, and if you do, draw one card. Its materials is 2+ level 7 spellcasters, though I don't expect you to ever summon this normally. Its monster effect is it cannot be used as Xyz materials, so no 5 material Zeus turbo shenanigans. If you can pendulum summon level 7 monsters, you can pendulum summon this monster. When this card is summoned, attach up to 2 non-equipped spells that list spell counter in its text, and or quick play spells from your graveyard to this card as material. Once per turn, you can attach one material that lists spell counter in its card text or one quick play spell card, and if you do, apply that effect if non-continuous spell or trap, or gain that card's name and effects if not, until your opponent's end phase, and if you do that, place one spell counter on this card. I should note, if you copy Institution, Citadel, or Endymion, that one spell counter does give a protection for the current turn and the next. Also do note that not only is Institution a soft once per turn, allowing search shenanigans, but Citadel's ability to allow you to use spell counters on it when activating effects like Servant's Pendulum effect is also a soft once per turn. Institution will protect it from destruction by card effects, and then Citadel will protect it from any destruction as long as it has spell counters. It can also apply the effects of cards like Super Poly to go right into Primal Arcanite, which is the next card that we'll be covering. Primal Arcanite Magician. Level 7 light spellcaster, 800 attack, 1700 defense. Its pendulum effect is it can special summon one Arcanite monster except a copy of itself from the extra deck. I purposely did not mention face up as this is supposed to be able to cheat out the others, or even Arcanite Magician or Supreme Arcanite Magician if you're feeling old school. Be mindful this is not considered properly summoning them. Its materials is one monster that you can place a spell counter on and one spellcaster monster. Very easy materials. Its monster effect is this card gains 1000 attack per spell counter on it. You can remove one spell counter from your field to activate one of the following effects. One of the effects is destroy one card. The other effect is once per turn, draw one card. With 800 attack and 1700 defense, it will have the same stats as Endymion once you add in these spell counters. I did not do 400 attack like the original because I think 2400 is a little too low with the power creep that has happened now that we're in 2022. I made it a scale 2 because I can see this being a little bit splashable since it provides its own spell counters and can pop stuff with said spell counters. In case you're wondering why its spell counter gain effect isn't tied to its fusion summon, but just when it's summoned by any means, it's because the Mythical Endymion don't really have too many ways to grant counters on things because they do so well on getting them themselves naturally. So for the lore of the Arcanites, to what I know about Endymion, the Spellstones, and the origin of the mythical beasts, the Arcanites would just be them being altered and or powered up by these Spellstones, similar to what Endymion did to himself in the mythical beasts. Since these people were with him for the longest from what I can tell, it would be safe to assume they'd be altered first and rewarded for their loyalty for his cause. They never said or showed Arcanite is a part of Endymion, but it's safe to assume they are since they have relations to Explosive Magician, as seen in Synchro Transcend, who has a very similar robe design as Endymion, which means that Explosive either was Endymion or someone who was clearly close and admired him, which by proxy makes Arcanite probably close or friendly to Endymion too. Not only that, Arcanite is a spell counter card, which, as we all know, majority of spell counter cards are related to Endymion. Crusader got promoted to General to act as Endymion's military advisor. Having been with him during the battle against spellbooks, the idea of his Arcanite counter is his ability to mobilize and buff surrounding comrades. Defender has become Guardian, leading the defending forces of the Citadel. His Spellbook of Wisdom effect came from Endymion's crew getting their hands on said spellbook and using it and spell stones to alter Defender, with it allowing him to draw out its power at will using spell stones, aka spell counters. Black Alchemist, who seems to be a studying partner of Tempest, seems very knowledgeable of spells. He's seen as countering a rival spell in that wacky alchemy, and then seen repairing a spell afterwards in Quick Booster. This tells me he should have some relation to quick play spells due to Quick Booster's effect to recycle and search them. Since he is Tempest's partner, it means he is probably on par magic-wise to her, so I ran with that as my foundation when I was making his effect. Assuming that you know the theme of the Mythical Beast, let's move on. Mythical Beast Magicat, level 3, light spellcaster tuner, 900 attack, 1500 defense. Its pendulum effect allows you to destroy it and one monster you can place a spell counter on to special summon one face down Arcanite monster from your extra deck. This is treated as Xyz, Synchro, and Fusion Summon respectively. Its monster effect is when it leaves the field by the effect of a Mythical Beast Pendulum monster, or for the summon of a spellcaster type monster from your extra deck, you can remove one spell counter from your field, and if you do, place one spell counter on the top of your deck. The combo is you use this to bring out Primal and use Primal to draw the card that you just put on the top of your deck. Otherwise, you can view this as just recycling spells back into your deck. I feel adding it straight to your hand will force me to make its monster effect a hard once per turn, which I don't want to do. Additionally, the spell counter cost is to lessen any potential abuse in non-spell counter decks with its float effect. Now next is Magical Beast Magidog. Level 4 light spellcaster tuner, 1800 attack, 1100 defense. Its pendulum effect and monster effect is the exact same as Magicat, except he adds a field spell from your graveyard to your hand instead. Notable targets is Village of the Spellcaster, Chicken Game, Citadel. In the situation it gets destroyed somehow. Question: should I add a restriction that you can only special summon them once per turn? I feel they are pretty restrictive as is with an Arcanite only pendulum effect. Back scales, Mythical Beast in general aren't as easy to summon as the Endymions, with all of them being able to special summon themselves. I don't have to link material restriction either, because majority of other decks with tuners can easily do the Hauki into Access Code Apollo combo in the current game. So for me, that tells me that Konami doesn't really care about it. They don't really see it as an issue. So what are your thoughts on that? The lore is the same as what Endymion does to all the Mythical Beasts. He altered them via spellstones, like how Mythical Beast Cerberus was altered by Endymion and became Mythical Beast Master Cerberus. Alright, off to the spells. I have a sneaking suspicion that Konami is thinking on having spell counters move to a more quick play style of spell usage. Cards that came to mind that either has spell counter art or spell counter effects is Quick Booster for its art, which searches quick plays, albeit terribly, Beast Magic Attack, also bad, and Mythical Bestiary, with both Quick Booster and Mythical Bestiary both having the same flow condition, needing to be destroyed by the opponent, but allowing you to chain their effects to their destruction to get both effects off. Additionally, all mythical spells and traps in the game are spell counter related, like Mythical Bestiary, Institution, and Beastomorph. So to keep up with the theme that Konami seems to have going with the whole spell counter spells and traps, I decided to continue that theme. Maybe they'll make a card that adds a mythical card, or maybe they'll add a card that adds a mythical spell and trap. Who knows? With that suspicion, I decided to make these new spells, except one, quick plays that also float under the same condition as the other two, and then has mythical in their name. Mythical Experiment. Target one monster you control that lists spell counter in its card text, including monsters in their pendulum zones. Then target one monster with a different attribute in your face-up extra deck, hand, or graveyard. First target gains the effects of the second target, and max number of spell counters it can hold becomes 3 while in the pendulum zone, or 2 while not, until the end phase of this turn while it remains face-up on the field. If any spell counters are removed by this, you can place them on a Endymion or mythical spell or trap you control. Its float effect is you can remove 10 spell counters from your side of the field to destroy all cards your opponent controls, so it basically floats into a Mega 10 magical cannon. The spell counter cap on the on-field effect is to stop Jackal King and Master Cerberus spell counter gain shenanigans. It's also to stop Royal Magic Library shenanigans, and to stop you from doing Arcanite Magician or Magical Abductor plus Master Cerberus to then make a very godly beat stick. And on top of that, I added the while it remains face up on the field, because you could theoretically give Magister's effect to Endymion, or give Serv's effect to Endymion, allowing Endymion to fetch a spell when he dies and to return to the pendulum zone all at once. Let me know if you guys think that was a necessary restriction. Thing to note is you can also copy pendulum effects with this. So you can turn your Jackal King that was searched by Cerberus into another Cerberus. Since it doesn't gain the name, you can use the effect again. More notable combos in a current real Mythical Endymion deck is giving Magister's monster effect to one of your boss monsters during your opponent's turn, or giving Servant's pendulum effect to anything that can have it, especially Abductor. Abductor can remove 3 to search, and then if you have used this, you can then activate Servant's effect on her if you have another 3 to use. It's also a pretty good way to get her out of the pendulum zone. You can also, in a way, combine the effects of things like Jackal King and Cerberus, so that during your opponent's turn, Jackal King has protection, or you could do it in the reverse where Cerberus has a negate. Oddly enough, you can also give Servant's pendulum effect to Endymion, which I didn't realize until I made this script, so let me know if you think that interaction is a little too much. Now off to the lore, I want to say this art is absolutely stellar. I will have a link to the artist in the pinned comments below. The lore of this one is pretty juicy, exactly what the effect and art suggests. The idea is Endymion is finding ways to push the limits of magic one can hold. If Endymion could possess more power and gain the powers of, for example, Master Cerberus, and find a way for all of his subordinates to do the same, even for a limited time, would be a great discovery, because since Endymion feels magic should be controlled and not given willy-nilly, similar to spellbooks, he would want to know if something like this is possible, how, and make sure that knowledge isn't given to the general world if he deems it too dangerous. Its float effect can be seen as a hostile force, your opponent, is getting in the way of this spell being casted, making Endymion release the cannon on them as punishment. Next up is Mythical Lexicon. Remove 2 spell counters from your field and target 1 quick play spell card in your graveyard except Lexicon, or 1 spell that lists spell counter in its card text. You can apply that effect or gain its effects into the end phase, your choice. That's very important. Then shuffle that target into the deck. Its float effect is you can remove 1 spell counter to draw 2 cards. This is supposed to be a mix of Quick Booster and Royal Magic Library. It did drew 1 at first on its float, but given the condition and you can't proc it yourself, I decided to make it 2. Something to note is it can apply the effect or gain that card's effects. Let's say your opponent attempts to MST this. You can target 1 Mythical Bestiary and apply its effect to give a card up to 2 spell counters. Then your opponent pops it and then it floats, allowing you to draw 2 cards. What you can also do in that same situation is have Lexicon gain the effects of Bestiary. Your opponent pops it, and then Lexicon will then draw 2 cards and summon a monster from the deck via Bestiary. You can even target Experiment to draw 2 and then board wipe. Lastly, it does target as an effect, so your opponent can't banish the card after you have targeted it. They have to preemptively banish whatever they think you will copy and or apply. I made sure to ensure that this is not easily splashable without a spell counter package. Its float used to not have the spell counter cost, but then I felt a lot of decks would run it, especially those back row heavy decks. It's a draw effect, used to be its normal effect, and the cost was 3 spell counters. But then I remembered that Exodia Library exists, and if drawing was its regular effect, its float effect would be overshadowed, because why set it if you can just draw 1 or 2 right now? Now for its lore. In the Royal Magic Library art, you will notice there are spellcasters in that card. It is believed that the monster isn't the library itself, but the spellcasters in it. In Royal Magic Library's art, you see 2 spellcasters, but it's safe to assume there are more on the upper platforms. In the art I found for Lexicon, it has spellcasters who are also wearing red robes in a very library-looking room. Lexicon, the definition, is the vocabulary of a person, language, or branch of knowledge, with the dictionary being as an example. Lexicon derives from the word in Latin that means of or for words, so I decided the lore would be that the library they once resided in, assuming it resides in the Citadel, was upgraded by Endymion. The cube, for the sake of the art and this conversation, would be a cube of knowledge. Interacting with it a certain way bestows knowledge and powers similar to a lock or an encryption, which will fit its on-field effect, where it copies effects almost like it's giving you that spell or imitation. And when it comes to strong cards like Experiment or Bestiary, it basically gives you half of the spell and not the spell's full power. This can be explained away in that Endymion is limiting knowledge that can be given by the cube, while the full power versions are held by those he deems responsible enough to wield them. The spellcasters in the art are librarians who's in charge of the organization and upkeep of the library. Alright, the last spell of the bunch, Mythical Tavern. It is actually a normal spell this time. Tribute one monster you can place a spell counter on in your hand or field, and if you do, draw 2 cards, then you can place spell counters on cards you control equal to the amount that were on the tributed monster. In case you are listening and not watching, all the spells have a harder once per turn. Do note, it does tribute as an effect and not a cost, so even if you apply its effect with something like Lexicon, you still have to tribute. I was going to make this an Endymion card to make it similar to Spellbook of Knowledge. However, even though Tavern can't really be searched, it can be copied by Lexicon to tribute one monster, draw 2 cards, and then if Lexicon is destroyed by its own effect, you can then draw 2 cards again. Spellbook have Spellbook of Master, which is searchable, but isn't a quick play nor has a float. With these comparisons, I decided to keep this as a mythical spell card. Another thing, the reason this tributes a monster and doesn't remove spell counters, for one, it's because you need spells for spell counters, but if the spells cost spell counters, you can't use it. That's why only experiments float and lexicons cost any spells, and even though they do, the effects are stellar, and lexicon's cost is very small. Tributing was also to stop Royal Magic Library Exodia stuff, which actually made some of these custom cards really difficult to make to work around just Royal Magic Library, but I managed. Which does lead me to a question with Lexicon and Tavern. Do you think the Lexicon plus Tavern combo is too strong? How this would work is you activate Lexicon, you will apply Tavern's effect to tribute a spell counter monster from your hand or field and then draw 2 cards. And then if Lexicon is getting destroyed by like an MST or something, you can draw another 2. So you end on a +2 in card advantage. I'm leaning towards acceptable because it requires this to be in the grave, it requires Lexicon to be destroyed, and a monster that you're willing to tribute, and neither is searchable, or at least easily searchable. Now to the lore. For one, I love this art. I have the link to the artist in the pinned comments below. Here you have Endymion in his black robes, you have Tempest with the scythe, you have Defender, who was the furthest from us to the left, you have Breaker, which is furthest from us to the right, you have Magidog and Magicat beneath the table, you have Crusader, who is closest to us. It took me a while to realize that was Crusader since he doesn't have his arm guards on. Each of these were considered power boosters back in old school spell counter decks, except I'm pretty sure that Magidog and Magicat was still considered terrible back then. And then Endymion was used as a one-of for his spell recursion. And by old school, I mean Arcanite Magician Turbo old school, which I'm kind of surprised Arcanite Magician isn't here. But regardless, I interpreted this as they are doing steady and chill. Endymion is the one with the book out, and Tempest is looking at him. And Breaker's face is tilted towards him, so it's safe to assume the others are looking at Endymion as well. The tributing effect is to signify that one of them left the table but handed off their notes, or their study notes, which the spell counter transfer signifies. And the draw 2 just makes sense because any card I notice that is knowledge related seems to draw or search cards like Spellbook Tower, Spellbook Magician, Spellbook of Secrets, Spellbook of Knowledge, and Royal Magic Library. Next, I want to go over some questions you guys might have. So, I'm going to explain my thought process on the Arcanites and how I determined how strong their effects should be. So for me, for these to be good, they had to be better than their original, and have to be as good as things like Nightmare, or Unicorn, Electromind, Access Code, Apollo, Absolute Vortex, etc. Not to mention things like Access Code, Absolute Vortex, and Unicorn are stronger and or are brought out more easily in their own archetype. And the reason these guys get spell counters in the zones and pop themselves, unlike Mythical Beasts and Endymions, is because they don't have any synergy with Mythical Institution, so popping themselves doesn't give it to spell counters, and they can go into your hand to then place them in the zones to give Citadel a counter. And I don't want their only interaction with these cards to be just soaking up spell counters, so to summon them. I wanted them to contribute to the accruing of spell counters in some way. Lastly, onto why they are all extra deck monsters. The thing is, spell counters have enough main deck support, or at least, outside of like tuners. Endymions were released in 2017, and it continues to age extremely well with the game, especially with being splashable in pretty much any Pendulum deck. If you look at the big two, Dark Magician and Blue Eyes, you'd know that they have a lot of support, right? But 90% of it isn't used. In the custom card community, it is said to not make too much support, especially for an existing archetype, because you can only play so many and probably won't run all of them. The latest main deck support for spell counters is pretty top notch. Only things like Medusa are pretty meh because of Selene, and things like Rogue being absolutely garbage. So when I was making these retrains and I was showing people in the community, it was asking me how come I never made a retrain of Explosive and Tempest Magician. I'm trying to make these retrains somewhat true to their original selves. Explosive is just an objectively weaker Arcanite Magician, so there isn't much to work with. I can't even use his name as a foundation since Explosive only does allude to destroying stuff, which Arcanite always did better. There is burn damage, but we all know what happened to Tempest Magician. And speaking of Tempest Magician, there's also nothing to work off of from her original, besides granting spell counters via discard, which Servant already does, but better. Giving up spell counters for burn, her second effect, assuming it'll be capped on how many you can remove, as in for the errata, will probably not be used, to be honest, unless it has a good other effect, because a good other effect that the deck doesn't already have access to, or a better version of, from itself, or just another archetype that it can just easily tech in. Tempest Magician also has enough representation. There is Magical Exemplar, Magical Something, Magical Abductor. I don't mind another card of her, but I don't feel the need to make another one for her. Speaking on Medusa, for Mythical Beast Medusa, it just needs an errata on its Pendulum effect to summon from the hand instead, even if they lock it to Mythical Beast, and it would be enough to be ran as a one of, because its monster effect is actually pretty decent. It's not amazing, but it's not bad either. I think it says Graveyard because they probably expected you to run some legacy cards like Exemplar, Defender, or get lucky with cards like Bestiary, but he just feels clunky in the modern version of his own archetype. And speaking of Mythical Beast, the Beast Magic Attack. So I didn't do a reprint of this either. It just needs a reprint, to be honest. Assuming they want to keep it locked to Mythical Beast, all they had to do is change the first effect to summon a Mythical Beast from the hand and keep everything as is. This would allow it to be good early, mid, and late game. Off to the last portion of the video, which is Questions Revisited, where I revisit questions that I've asked throughout the video. Should Experiment allow Endymion plus Servant interaction? Together, it does allow Endymion to gain spell counters while in the Pendulum Zone, allowing him, in the right circumstances, to be able to pick either summoning method. Can be done in reverse, where Servant can use Indy's nuke, should I require the targets have 1k plus attack. Second question is Lexicon plus Tavern combo too strong? You can theoretically apply Tavern's effect when Lexicon is about to be destroyed to draw 2 from Tavern and then draw 2 from Lexicon. You'll be mindful that Tavern has to be in the graveyard for this to even work. Next, should Magicat and Magidog only be special summonable once per turn? Does them being a tuner warrant that? And lastly, what do you guys think about my Medusa and Beast Magic Attack errata? That is all the custom cards that I've made for these spell counters. Let me know if there is any combo or any card that you feel is crazy broken. May the spell stones be with you.